From 299 Queen Street West, this is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. I'm Lena Latafat. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Toronto After Tory, our special coverage of what comes next for the city as Mayor John Tory announces his resignation. We have team coverage tonight. Beatrice Faisman is at City Hall. That is where John Tory is committed to seeing through the budget process. Scott Hurst, he's downtown talking to people about what's unfolded over the past week. And we have an expert panel on standby to talk about the political implications for what comes next. We're also joined tonight by our political expert panel, Denzelman Wong, former Deputy Mayor of Toronto under John Tory, Adrian Batra, Editor-in-Chief at the Toronto Sun, who's also worked in the Mayor's office under Rob Ford, and Jennifer Keesmaat, former city planner and former mayoral candidate who ran against Tory in 2018.
All right, I did warn the public that if there's any further disruptions that we will ask security to vacate the council chambers, and you will be removed and you will not be allowed to come back in the council chambers. I made that very clear. Mayor Tory.
Speaker, thank you. Before I begin, I wanted to assure the members of council that I consulted Michael on how he wanted this to proceed in the circumstances.
Tory made his first remarks to council after Friday night's bombshell announcement that he plans to step down after admitting to an affair with a former staff member. Questions surrounding Tory's future and his resignation plans are getting louder, with allies asking him to stay, and a recent poll indicating Torontonians are split.
He's been a real champion of people. He's a strong promoter of the United Way. He's a member of the Champion Circle for the city, helping to encourage donations across his division. He's been a real champion of people. He's a strong promoter of the United Way. He's a member of the Champion Circle for the city, helping to encourage donations across his division.
Tory has indicated he'll stay on as mayor in order to push the budget through. The budget is the first he prepared under new strong mayor powers. There are also persistent questions about whether Mayor Tory should resign from the job, which he hasn't formally done yet, by the way. In fact, some councillors today said they've discussed a possible leave of absence for the mayor before making a firm decision. We'll get into that coming up tonight.
I believe that John Tory has been one of the best mayors we've had in the city, and I've worked with a number of mayors. As you know, I've been many years on council and as a former mayor as well. And we have overwhelming support from the public. I've been receiving calls from constituents and emails. Please don't have him resign. I think that he made an error in judgment, yes, absolutely, but that's not a reason to resign. In the past, there's been other politicians that have done worse, and they've never resigned.
I think there's no one that can bring the citizens of Toronto together better than Mayor Tory. And I also think, just as importantly, there's no one that can bring other levels of government to the table like Mayor Tory. And I think that's really important. And I've heard from other sources, I haven't spoken directly, but I know, I've heard that there are federal cabinet ministers, provincial cabinet ministers, of course, fellow councillors, all urging the mayor to stay on and fulfill his obligation.
And joining us live in studio tonight is Natalie Johnson, CTV Toronto's City Hall reporter. Natalie, thanks so much for joining us. So much to get into. How bizarre was this day at City Hall with a massive elephant in the room and Toronto's future so unclear?
Well, this is it, Lena. We haven't seen a council meeting like that since the days of Rob Ford. The meeting started at 9:30 this morning. They weren't even able to start discussing the budget until 2 p.m. because of all of the protests in the chamber. The chamber was emptied 3 times because of the protests, with the speaker shutting everything down. And it was ultimately a very strange time, because even though the budget was before everyone, really the chatter in the chamber was all about John Tory's future. Would he resign? Would it be today? What would that look like?
Right, and we understand tonight Council has just voted to extend budget talks, so we're not done just yet, Natalie.
We're not done just yet, and the question still remains, will he be handing in his resignation papers to the city clerk tonight? That could potentially be a procedural possibility. We know that city council has to be sitting in order to declare his seat vacant, so if that doesn't happen tonight while council is still sitting, that pushes the clock back until the next council meeting when that can actually happen. So there's a lot of variables at play here on the timing.
And it was so interesting listening to city councilors today, some saying, he's got to go, and others saying he deserves a second chance. We heard Councillor Francis Nunziata talking about a leave of absence.
Well, certainly a number of the mayor's allies have been quietly pushing him over the last few days to reconsider his decision to resign. And as the days have gone on, many of them have become more vocal about their opinion on that. Francis Nunziata, obviously a very loyal Tory ally. But we also heard today from Brad Bradford, from John Burnside, the TTC chair, James Pasternak, all of these councillors who have been meeting with John Tory over the last few days, coming out today and saying he's the best one for the city. We need him to stay on. Also arguing that they've been hearing from constituents who say now is not the time to be spending the money on a by-election, given that we just spent millions on a general election in the fall.
Are there whispers at City Hall about John Tory potentially reconsidering his decision?
Certainly, the mayor's office has not indicated anything of the sort. I think some councillors are hopeful that he might reconsider, but everybody who has spoken to him has said to us that this is a very personal decision and have not really shed light on where he's thinking. Maybe he hasn't made it known to them exactly where he stands on that right now. There was pressure for him to stay on, but it would really go against his brand, I think, at this point to reverse that decision.
Okay, we'll have to see what happens. CTV's Natalie Johnson, you're going to continue to stick around and chat with us, so thanks so much for this, and we'll continue to check in with Natalie. Now, for more on City Council's meeting to debate the 2023 budget, let's check in with our Beatrice Vaisman. She's standing by at City Hall with the latest. Beatrice, what's happening behind you?
Well, the discussions continue this hour, Lena. They just voted just before 8 o'clock to continue right through the agenda. So we don't know how long we're going to be here tonight, nor how long city councilors are going to be here tonight before they ultimately put this budget to bed. But to jump off something Natalie was talking about, the fact that the mayor's office is definitely keeping information close to their vest. I just said a second ago, as a spokesperson from the mayor's office passed by, I said, hypothetically, if the budget passes tonight, is the mayor going to be talking to reporters? And I was only told to be determined. So take that for what it's worth. I think kind of everything has been up in flux at City Hall since this bombshell dropped on Friday. When it comes to city proceedings, though, certainly city work is happening here tonight. The component when it comes to property taxes with the budget, that passed. So if this budget goes ahead as planned, it's going to be a combined 7% total property tax increase, 5.5% property tax plus 1.5% city building levy. The mayor addressing his council colleagues for the first time since I've been in council chamber since 2 o'clock this afternoon. And here's what he said about this budget specifically.
What the budget represents overall and the motion today is a whole series of difficult but very carefully considered choices. That's what you have to make. You have to try and achieve that balance. You can't do everything that you want to do. You never can in a budget, whether it's a household budget or a company budget or a government budget.
The mayor calling this the toughest budget that he's seen since he became mayor back in 2014, saying it's important, though, to find balance at a time of uncertainty here in the city as we recover from COVID-19. When it comes to the discussions in the hallways, in the elevators, in the catacombs, as I like to say, here at City Hall, much of that discussion definitely based on whether Mayor John Tory is going to stay or go. We've heard some council colleagues urging him to reconsider, amongst them Councillor James Pasternak, who I had a chance to talk to on Monday, and he didn't really make a secret of the fact that he still supports the mayor. Here's what he said today.
If there's a trickle of more bad news, then it's a distraction from the key work we have to do here at City Hall. That is a risk that he has to assess, and more important than all of this, he has to talk with his family and see where they stand and whether he should stay or go.
Meantime, you've got others like Councillor Sachs, who told me that if the mayor, rescinded his intention to resign, she would lose some respect for him. Councillor Alejandra Bravo also telling me she's concerned that if he stays on and kind of the chaos continues, she's worried it's going to become a circus here at City Hall like we saw under the late Rob Ford days. So still a lot of time for things to get interesting here at City Hall tonight. We'll continue to bring you the action here on CP24.
All right, Beatrice Vaisman reporting live tonight. Thank you, Beatrice. Let's check in with our Scott Hurst now. He's standing by with more reaction from Torontonians, and everybody has an opinion about this story, Scott.
Lena, just your typical February night in the city, right? The Leafs game's on TV. People are packing this downtown sports bar after work. Well, you don't have to ask too many questions to get them talking about John Tory, get them talking about politics. Maybe the first question is about Austin Matthews making his return tonight, but after that, everyone wants to talk about John Tory and ask, should he stay or should he go? And that reaction is mixed that we found down here. That reaction is mixed that we've been hearing out at City Hall. And that reaction has been mixed from what we've been hearing throughout a lot of people across the city through the last couple days since he made this surprise announcement just a few days ago. So we talked to people down here at this sports bar, first about some hockey and then about John Tory. Here's what they had to say about whether the mayor should stay or go.
I'm kind of on the fence, to be honest. I'm on the fence. I think, yes, in the sense, if those travels that he did were on my tax-paying dollars, then yes. If not, then it's up to the city to decide.
Yeah, I don't think it was great what he done. You know, he was going out with her for years, and yeah, it wasn't great. I don't know. I don't think it was a very nice thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's really embarrassing. I feel horrible for his wife and his family, and I think he should definitely step down.
I'm not sure. A lot of people think that he should stay in office. I don't know.
I think what we need to do is move forward. We need to make Toronto great again. I was born here. I lived here a majority of my life. We need to figure out how to make Toronto fantastic so people keep coming back. And we need to just sort of, this affair on this side, let it go, and let's move forward with the budget. Let's make sure our streets are safe, and let's make sure that we have an infrastructure that supports the next 50 years.
So very similar to what we've been hearing through the halls of City Hall and through the streets of Toronto from what we've been hearing here tonight from these sports fans is that you talk about John Tory, you talk about local politics, and reaction is mixed whether he should stay or whether he should go, whether he should still try to push through this budget or not. This is what people are trying to get to the bottom of. Should he leave right now and not deal with this budget, or should he get the budget passed and then try to figure out what happens next, and then does he step down after that? Of course, people want to come down here sometimes after work, maybe forget about politics and forget about what's going on at City Hall, forget that there's all this distraction around the budget. But then when you come down here and talk to people and ask them just a few questions, it turns to John Tory pretty quickly. Lena, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Scott Hurst reporting live tonight. Thanks so much, Scott. Now, John Tory's affair and his plans to resign are also making headlines in the province and in the nation's capital.
The guy's a relentless worker. I don't even think, I always say I don't sleep, but I don't think he sleeps either. He's up at 5, he's out there, and the guy doesn't stop till midnight. We've had late night conversations. So is he the best thing that we have in Toronto? Yes, he is the best thing. And let's not upset the apple cart for a personal issue he's dealing with. He's a really, really good mayor, and let's move forward.
I want to recognize John's years of service to the City of Toronto, and that he was a strong partner for us. I know Toronto is facing real challenges, and I certainly hope that the current and future leadership is able to step up and make sure that Torontonians continue to get the opportunities.
And Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland categorically denied reports she encouraged John Tory not to resign.
Let me be absolutely clear and categorical. The story that was published yesterday is wholly untrue and not accurate.
Do you want a retraction?
I'm going to leave it up to my press team to deal with the finer points of the journalists. But, you know, I can speak for myself, and I'm speaking for myself right now. And let me just be very clear. That story is entirely untrue.
And for more on this, let's check in with our expert panel tonight. We're sitting down with Denzel Minnan-Wong, former Deputy Mayor of Toronto under John Tory, Adrienne Batra, Editor-in-Chief of the Toronto Sun, and Jennifer Keesmaat, former Chief City Planner and former mayoral candidate who ran against John Tory back in 2018. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Where do we begin? Denzel, I guess we'll begin with you here. Was this the strangest day of John Tory's career? How would you describe the chaos in council?
Well, I think we've had more chaotic and dramatic days. Obviously, when Mayor Ford was there, those were some pretty interesting times. I think that there was a lot of theater involved today. The protesters are out, and there are certain individuals that would like to take advantage of the circumstances to get their way. So if you have John Tory, who's mayor, who the majority of people in the city of Toronto voted for, who I think generally put together a decent budget, but there are others who would like other things and don't. He is not their cup of tea, shall we say. Mm-hmm. It's in their interest to kind of go in there and bang the drums and shout and scream and create all sorts of nonsense. They do it because they have, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have their own political agenda. That's what I see at City Hall, or what I saw at City Hall on more than one occasion.
Adrian, based on the security and the cameras and the reporters at City Hall, does it feel like Rob Ford is mayor again?
Not quite. I mean, there is sort of that. This is probably the most excitement since John Tory became mayor in 2014. That's for sure.
Not in a good way.
So, and it's not for any good reason. City Hall, city government is the closest to the people, right? I mean, they feel you can walk into this people's house and have your say. But I think Denzel makes an important point, because today is budget day. What we saw was not unusual. The booing when John Tory stood up, that was unusual. But the yelling and the activists, them banging their drums and doing all that, that is not uncommon. The challenge is this is an important day. We're dealing with some very weighty issues in the city of Toronto. And the increased taxes, the potholes, the crime, the TTC, none of those were really in the spotlight. It was all about John Tory and his political future. And so I think that's where Torontonians lost out today.
Yeah, and Adrian, I think it's so important that you talk about how important this budget is. Jennifer, how awkward do you think it was for John Tory and city councillors on the floor in the chamber trying to talk about really important things? And there's this big elephant in the room, the scandal that they have to tiptoe around.
Yeah, well, very tricky. And, there was more media than there usually is in the council chamber. You could argue that's a good thing. We need lots of scrutiny of the budget. But the reason that the media was there was not really so much about the budget. So it creates an incredibly awkward dynamic. And look, the clamshell is a pretty strange place on the best of days. You've got, soft kind of power dynamics, people who talk to people who, will not talk to certain people or collaborate with certain people. And then you add this layer on top of it and the uncertainty, all day long, this swirling question. Did he really resign? Is he maybe not going to resign? So that added another layer that was pretty strange. You've got people who are actively hiring campaign managers and building their campaign team, but also standing up and saying, well, I think Mayor Tory should stay. So, that's a pretty weird energy in any room. And, it's a really critical point. This was an important budget. Like, we've got real stuff to be dealing with in this city. We've got real issues. We should be having a real debate about where we're spending our money, the best way to solve really challenging issues, like the lack of state of good repair and infrastructure, like the safety issues on the TTC. And in the absence of having that debate, I think the city really loses out, because we need to be talking about that hard stuff.
Absolutely. I've got to throw it a break here, but very quickly, is there anybody here who thinks John Tory will resign tonight?
I think he might. I think he might resign tonight if they get the budget done.
Okay.
If the budget's done, yes, but it's not a bet I'm willing to take.
Okay. Denzel?
Anything could happen.
Fair enough. That's probably the best answer. Okay, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a quick break now. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24 special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall as deliberations continue tonight. After the break, we'll take a look at who takes over for Tory when and maybe if he resigns, and what that means for his strong mayor power. Stick around. Welcome back to CP24's special coverage of Toronto after Tory. Once Mayor John Tory officially resigns and before a by-election is held, Deputy Mayor Jennifer McKelvey will take over the job. However, the strong mayor powers do not transfer over to her. We learned that early this week. The Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister says strong mayor powers do not transfer to an interim mayor. Once a new mayor is elected, in a by-election, of course, that person becomes the new head of council and can then exercise those powers.
I expect that he's here today because he knows that the strong mayor powers, some of which he requested by the province, aren't transferable to anybody but the sitting mayor. The question obviously will be, where do we go from here? And the longer this continues, the longer this very unpredictable time continues, the more confusion will ensue, and that's no good for Toronto. But today's focus is going to be about the budget, and that's really what we're here to do.
So, Jennifer, if the mayor decides to veto any amendments to this budget, that could make this a very lengthy process.
It could, but the way it looks right now, it's a pretty typical day we've seen for a budget process from the perspective of the types of amendments that have come forward. Now, we learned earlier that the council doesn't actually vote on the budget, they only vote on the amendments, and given that there isn't any kind of crazy poison pill in those amendments that I suspect would lead to a veto, I think this might be a pretty straightforward process, which is probably the reason why they voted to extend and to get it done tonight. If it was going to be more contentious, there would likely be more debate. They would likely go into another day, but it sounds like they think they can get this over the finish line.
So if John Tory doesn't have to exercise his controversial strong mayor powers, Adrian, that's probably a good thing for him?
Yeah, I think that's good, and that's good for Torontonians. The expectation with the strong mayor powers was that something over the top was going to come through, and the real ability to build housing in the city, and so there's certain councillors that are opposed to certain areas for development. That's what in part the intention was of strong mayor powers, including to the point where when we were talking to Mayor Tory, even during the election, we asked him, what would you use it for? Give us this one scenario. And it was only centered in and around housing where he said he would. So I don't see anything really coming forward tonight. And so that's good in a sense that we're going to move forward and the agenda moves through. But perhaps for John Tory's political future, it starts the clock, really. We're all going to be sitting there waiting for the statement about does he or doesn't he?
Denzel, do you think he knows what he's going to do once that budget passes?
I think he does. I think that they're only small amendments because the ones that would move larger amendments are looking ahead. And if the mayor were to stick around to veto, that might not work against their own political agenda. So if they would, and give him more time to think. So, if you wanted to think what's the strategy for them would be, don't give him a reason to stick around for the veto and push him to a decision soon. That might be their strategy.
Oh, interesting.
Does John know what to do? I don't know. It's been a difficult time for him. It's been an emotional time for him. It hasn't been an easy time for him. One knows what one might do, but who knows? Things change, circumstances change. Even to the extent that here we are on Friday, this huge bombshell explodes. And we think, that's it, we're done. But now we hear that people are maybe giving him the benefit of the doubt. And so, he's not immune from hearing those things. And people are calling him and they're texting him. And you have to ask yourself, how does that impact one's decision-making matrix when they're saying, I'm talking to a bunch of people, a lot of people, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt on this one. We think you're a great mayor, and you made a mistake, but we would still like you to stay and be mayor because we think you're valuable to the City of Toronto.
We are going to talk about what his allies are saying tonight, but very quickly, Adrian, I want to ask you the same question. Do you think John Tory knows what he is about to do?
I think he's got both prepared. It's almost like the victory and the defeat speech in an award show. I think yes, I really do. Because he has people in and around him, including those in his office, who are saying, you need to stick by and stay to your word, what you said on Friday. And then on the other hand, he's got people very close to him saying, it's okay, you made a hasty decision. Look at what the alternative is, and that is far more terrifying, as as Premier Ford was saying today, that you need to stay, you need to weather this storm and deal with whatever comes. So, I mean, I don't envy that position for him to be in.
Jennifer, last word to you.
Well, one caveat to that, which is we're assuming here that we know the whole story.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
John Tory is the one who knows the whole story, and I suspect that one of the reasons why he resigned is because he knows the whole story, and he didn't want the whole story litigated in the public domain. So a portion of the story is currently being litigated. If there's a much bigger story that we don't know, that he does not want the Integrity Commissioner to investigate, then I suspect that the resignation will hold because no amount of people saying, hey, this isn't a big enough deal, you really should have stuck around, is going to change the things that he does know. So I think that's a little qualifier to the two sides of the coin.
Okay, lots to get into. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24's special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall. This is a live look from inside council chambers tonight, a live shot of embattled John Tory as those marathon budget deliberations continue. We'll have much more coming up right after this, including what people in this city think about Tory's decision to step down. Was it the right move? Welcome back. Since John Tory's announcement to step down, CP24 has been out talking to Torontonians about what they make of what unfolded and what comes next for the city. Take a listen.
I think it's really inappropriate as a leader to be having a relationship with staff members.
And also unexpected from him because it wasn't really in character what his public image was.
I don't think that the mayor has a responsibility to be a moral or a relationship guideline for the people in the city.
Okay, for more on this, let's check in with our expert panel here. We're sitting down with Jennifer Keesmaat, Denzelman Wong, and Adrian Batra. Jennifer, do you think John Tory could have survived this scandal?
Well, in some ways it's a crazy question because it depends on if there's more to it, there isn't more to it. He's obviously going through a deeply personal crisis, the details of which we don't know and we really shouldn't know. We don't need to know. But it's public office, and in public office you have a public accountability. And it's also this very strange dynamic because we're talking here about an employer and an employee. And so there's also a public interest related to the fact that it is an employer and an employee in a public institution. So could he have survived this? I don't know. People survive all kinds of crazy things. Remorse and level of remorse sometimes matters, but sometimes it doesn't matter at all. So I think this really has to do with what's going on in his head and how does he think he wants to move into the future? Because the truth is, if he did continue into the future, this is something that never leaves him. This is something that dogs him at every press conference. It's something that is underlying every single conversation that he has moving forward. If there was a big investigation by the Integrity Commissioner, not pretty for his staff, not pretty for other people at City Hall who have to comment on things like whether they thought there were unfair job competitions, who they're going to look into bonuses and where bonuses were given, were bonuses given inappropriately as a result of this relationship. Like, this is very, very messy from an employer-employee perspective. And I don't know, it might be that he just thought, this is so far off my brand, I want to throw in the towel, I want to walk away from it. And, you sort of can't blame him for doing that.
Yeah,
I think it's very tricky. Yeah, he might have said, you know what, this is just too much to bear, I'm out. So. And I do believe he's remorseful because he loved this job. Yeah. I don't think he went out and sabotaged the job because he truly, if there's one thing we all know for sure is that John Tory loved this job, really loved it.
Denzel, you have Tory's allies asking him, begging him to stay on. Could he walk this back?
Yeah, there's a scenario where he could walk it back. One of the things I think that you would consider is, you worry about the drip, like the things coming out. I would say that the first thing you would want to do would be to get the Integrity Commissioner to do a complete report as soon as possible so you can, get whatever needs to be investigated out of the way and then try and move on. And I think in those circumstances, could he continue on for the term? I think he could. There are a lot of issues the city needs to deal with, and I think he's got I think he's got a handle on most of it. You look at things like federal provincial relations, being able to get money from the other levels of government. I think most people would say he's the best guy to do that. There's no one else. John Tory has been important to the city, where we were 8 years ago, we've moved a lot further. What a lot of people a lot of people don't follow City Hall. Newsflash. A lot of people, and that's what you find when you're no longer at City Hall. That's what I found out.
Until things get interesting, of course.
Sure.
They're following it now.
But even then, they kind of
now.
just roll their eyes. But the one thing I hear from people more than anything else, they say, you know what? I don't see City Hall in newspapers as much as I did now that John Tory's in place. He's a calm, stable influence. And that means a lot to them.
Yeah.
They want to go to bed at night knowing the government is safe when they get up in the morning. And that's John Tory.
Adrian.
But John Tory upended all of that. All of the good work. And sadly, this is his legacy right now. He is the mayor that had an affair with a junior staffer that had to quit. That's the headline, and we're not moving past that until he moves past that. His very own statement said, I need to spend time now to reflect on my actions and work on repairing my family. It's very difficult to be the mayor of the largest city in the country with a budget that's bigger than some provinces while you're trying to deal with these very serious personal issues. Jennifer's right. We have no business in that conversation. And so he shouldn't drag the city into that conversation. I've known John Tory for a very long time. This was the job that he wanted. Back in 2007, he wanted this job. He's been campaigning it for a very long time.
2003.
2003, so excuse me, sorry, 2003. I think
Further than that.
2007, I think, was the provincial election. But he stayed in the spotlight and talked about important issues in the city for the very reason of eventually becoming the one that helms the city. And so I know he has tremendous regret. I know he knows there was a mistake, but he chose to run for a third term, knowing that this was going on. And again, back to his statement, this relationship ended only recently, and it was only until the media started asking some questions that he came clean.
Right.
So there's a trust loss as well. And you can't agree on pretty much anything at City Council on a given day, on a good day, let alone when you have this drama unfolding in the mayor's personal life. So he's going to have a hard time getting those votes, getting the cooperation. That doesn't mean, and that doesn't take away from the previous successes he's had. I just think going forward, if he chooses to stay on, it's going to be just that much more difficult for him.
Yeah, and he would have to be prepared for that. Okay, this fascinating conversation will continue. We're going to take a quick break. Now, you're watching special coverage right here on CP24, Toronto's breaking news. It's been a budget day like no other at City Hall, and it continues tonight, complete with protests and debates over the mayor's future. That's a live look of John Tory. We'll have more special coverage coming up. Welcome back to CP24, special coverage of Toronto after Tory. There is still a lot of uncertainty surrounding Mayor John Tory's future and his resignation plans over the past few days. Allies have been asking him to stay on. Others are asking him to go. But a recent poll suggests Torontonians are split. A Forum Research poll released yesterday found of the 1,042 respondents, 45% say they think Tory shouldn't resign, while 43% believe he should. The remaining were not sure. Men were also more likely to think he should resign compared to women at 45% compared to 41%. That's interesting. Of respondents that voted for Tory last fall, more than 2/3 believe he should not step down. The poll was conducted yesterday and is considered accurate within 3 percentage points either way, 19 times out of 20. And CP24's Scott Hurst is standing by with more reaction from Torontonians. You know, Scott, should he stay? Should he go? That's such a big question in our city tonight.
That's the question on everyone's mind tonight, Lena. And you'd think, though, coming to a sports bar with the Leafs game on, Austin Matthews back in the lineup, too, that they wouldn't want to talk politics. They'd want to come down here, meet up with some friends, grab some food and some drinks and watch the game and kind of forget about politics for a while. Well, it didn't take too much to convince people to talk about what's going on down at City Hall. And as you mentioned, should he stay or should he go? And very similar to the poll results, quite mixed down here about what people think of Mayor John Tory.
I'm not sure. A lot of people think that he should stay in office. I don't know.
I think what we need to do is move forward. We need to make Toronto great again. I was born here. I lived here majority of my life. We need to figure out how to make Toronto fantastic so people keep coming back. And we need to just sort of, this affair on this side, let it go, and let's move forward with the budget. Let's make sure our streets are safe, and let's make sure that we have an infrastructure that supports the next 50 years.
So, Lena, as you mentioned, mixed results in that poll, mixed results of what people are saying here down at the sports bar tonight. Despite a Leafs game being on, they still are talking about what's going on over at City Hall. Lena, we'll send it back to you.
Scott, thanks so much for this. And you know who else is still talking about this? Ontario's Premier Doug Ford. He weighed in on Toronto Mayor John Tory's resignation. Now, he says he won't comment on the outgoing mayor's personal life, but he said now is not the time for change.
There's your private family, and then there's business. And I can tell you, Mayor Tory has been a phenomenal partner. He's been a really good mayor for the city of Toronto. And just in my opinion, it's not time to change. Everything's going tickety-boo in Toronto, working well with the federal and provincial government. And what happens in their private life is strictly up to the mayor and their family.
Everything is tickety-boo, he says. For more analysis, I'm joined by CTV's political strategist and former advisor for Prime Minister Paul Martin, Scott Reid. Scott, great to see you tonight. Thanks so much for joining us for our special coverage.
You bet. Great to be here.
So you've been tweeting about this, and you think if John Tory stays, that would be a cancerous idea. Why do you say that?
Well, because I like John Tory, because I care about the guy. And I know what will happen if he reneges on his resignation. What will happen is all those quiet questions that haven't been asked with force will come at him like a tank, right? When did this affair start? When did it end? How did she leave the office? What was the expenditure of funds? How's the situation at home? What exactly has happened? All of those withering, personal, burning questions that he said on Friday night he didn't want to subject himself to, his family to, his wife to, the young woman involved to, and all of that would come stampeding at him like a herd of bisons. This is such a terrible idea. And you know, there's a thread to all of the advice from people who are saying, well, you should stay. And it is that they like having him there because it serves their interests. The Premier wants John Tory there because he knows him and it's easy for him to work with him. Councillors who are holding press conferences in front of his office, their position is entrenched by John Tory's presence. So they're threatened if he leaves. But people who care about John Tory, people who know John Tory, they think he made the right decision last Friday, and they know that to try to withdraw that decision would be a politically disastrous move.
This is a live shot of John Tory tonight in council chambers. It could be one of his last, Scott. You don't think he could have survived this scandal?
I don't think he could have, because John Tory is not that brand of politician that we see so often these days who walks around without shame. Now, look, he made a mistake. By his own acknowledgement, he made a mistake. He had a relationship with a staffer. You know, we can debate, about personal matters. That's a professional matter. So he knows he made a mistake. He acknowledged that mistake. Could he have hung on? Sure, if he was willing to face all those tough questions and all those indignities. He's not built like that. John Tory doesn't want to talk about his, relationships in public. And so I don't think he's built to survive it. I certainly don't think that he would survive if he tried to, withdraw it and all those questions came crashing down on top of him. I think the look on his face tells you where he's going. And I see this clip here again. That does not look like a guy who's girding himself for battle. He's made his decision. I'd bet $100 that when this budget is passed late this evening, quite likely, he will then follow that very quickly with confirmation of his resignation.
But it's got to be tempting when you hear from city councillors and the general public saying, look, we're willing to forgive and forget.
So let's distinguish between them. So the poll and the public. Yeah, sure. They're split even. Part of that is a reflection of the goodwill that was generated by the way that he managed Friday, that he appeared to in a sea of politicians who never take responsibility or accept consequences to be doing so. All of that goodwill is going to melt, or at least a whole whack of it. So the poll doesn't measure the dynamic reality of how all that will unfold. Not to say what will come tumbling out if people ask the tough questions that because of his resignation, they generally suspended. Now, as for the councillors, I mean, come on. Are those people going to be standing with him when the gunfire goes and the cannonballs fly? No, they'll be ducking for cover.
Scott Reid, we'll have to leave it there. Always a fascinating conversation with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
And for a closer look at what happens next and what happened today, let's go live again to our City Hall reporter, CTV City Hall reporter, Natalie Johnson. So, Natalie, you had the chance to ask John Tory several times today, will you resign? How did he respond?
Well, you have to wonder, if he had made his statement on Friday night saying that he was going to resign, and the next day hadn't been a Saturday, and the city clerk was available then, would he have then walked to that office the next morning and handed in the resignation papers? Who is to say? But having had this time to think about it and hear all of these voices, all of these phone calls come in, these meetings with councillors, hearing from the Premier, whether that starts to potentially change his mind, the results of the public polling, maybe he starts to reconsider the decision. In any case, we had not heard from the Mayor since Friday, hadn't been taking questions. We had an opportunity today when he walked from his office up to the elevator to Council Chamber, so I asked whether he was reconsidering his decision to resign. He said, well, we've got a budget today. That's exactly what I'm looking forward to. That's what I'm working on. Fair enough. Then all of these other councillors started coming out saying, John Tory is the man for the job. He's valuable to the city. Constituents don't want to pay for another by-election. And so on the second opportunity, I asked him whether he'd been listening to these calls from some of his allies to reconsider his decision. And once again, he turned back to the budget. So, obviously the messaging there was very planned, very intent on getting this budget through with his strong mayor powers. Only he would have been able to push this budget through with those powers from the province because we know they would not have transferred to the deputy mayor as acting mayor. So, very clear going into it today that that's what he wanted to talk about, and any decision or announcement on resignation was going to come after that.
Right. That seems like to be off the table. There is a lot of talk about the potential cost of a by-election. This comes at a time when Toronto is struggling financially. Are we getting a better sense of how much that could cost the average taxpayer?
Well, it sounds like the total cost of a by-election would be about $18 million. And as you say, the city is facing unprecedented pressures on the budget. That is part of the reason why today's budget meeting was such a big deal. We probably would have seen some level of protest, some level of criticism toward this budget, regardless of whether the mayor scandal had taken place, because today was such a big day. The city's looking at the biggest property tax hike since amalgamation. Unprecedented pressures, really in large part due to the pandemic. And so is there a line in this year's budget for an $18 million by-election? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll leave it there. CTV Toronto's Natalie Johnson, thanks so much for joining us in studio tonight, Natalie. It's 8:51, 7 degrees. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24 special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall. A live look of John Tory tonight in council chambers as budget talks continue. Now, Tory says he's committed to stay on as mayor until City Council votes on the 2023 budget. We'll have the latest with our Beatrice Faisman, who's live at City Hall, coming up. Welcome back. The city's budget debate got underway today, and as expected, much of the attention was not on the budget, rather John Tory.
Sir, are you reconsidering your decision to resign?
When he emerged from his office this morning, he faced questions about whether he still plans to resign after admitting to an affair with a staffer. Tory would only say he was ready to deal with the budget and get that done. CP24's Beatrice Faisman is standing by at City Hall with the very latest. We've been following budget deliberations very closely. Beatrice, what's the latest?
Still going right now. Some theatrics right now by Councillor Gord Perks, who's taking umbrage with the fact that the Toronto Police Service is getting some extra $53 million in this proposed budget. We just heard from Councillor Cole a few minutes ago. Prior to that, it was Councillor James Pasternak, who says it's not a perfect budget, but a perfect budget doesn't exist right now, especially as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. But Councillor's still going strong since around 2 o'clock this afternoon, taking a brief 30-minute break for dinner, but that's about it. And they're going to keep going until they get through the agenda. That's what they voted on. That's what they decided. So it sounds like things are going to be settled tonight when it comes to this budget. We also got the chance to hear from Mayor John Tory himself for the first time since 2 o'clock this afternoon, where he made his pitch really to city councillors, saying that this is a budget that has cash and funding for better housing, for better public transit, for more community supports and policing as well. And he urged his council colleagues to support this budget. Here's more from the mayor.
It's been far and away the toughest budget that I've experienced working on this one for almost a year, and it's the 9th one that I've worked on. I think the combination of rising inflation, increased fuel costs, interest rate hikes, supply chain challenges, and increased shelter costs, decreased TTC fare box revenues, all of this coming at the same time as growing human need, made this a very difficult budget, and that was added on top of concerns we all have with respect to community safety and affordability.
Certainly the councillors who are allies of Mayor John Tory, they support this budget, including Councillors Pasternak and Brad Bradford, just for example, along with Councillor Burnside. And then, of course, there are those who feel as though they weren't included enough into the consultation and budget process. Amongst them, Councillor Matlow, who made a statement on the council floor, chamber floor as well. So they're still going strong, and we'll continue to bring you all the updates here on CP24 as it happens.
All right, so they're still going, and that might mean that Toronto's budget may be passed tonight. We'll keep you posted, of course. You're watching special coverage right here on CP24. Mayor John Tory hasn't officially resigned yet, but once he does, that would trigger a by-election. We'll check in with our political panel right after this. Welcome back. Mayor John Tory hasn't officially resigned yet, but once he does, that will trigger a by-election. Several candidates have already expressed their intent to run for the city's top job. In terms of possible mayoral contenders to fill that void when John Tory does officially resign, here's what we know so far. Gil Penalosa, he says he's in. That's confirmed. Josh Matlow says conversations are being had. Denzel Minnan-Wong not saying no. Brad Bradford released a statement on Sunday saying, I haven't made a decision yet, but I'm continuing to talk.
Why you wouldn't want to run for mayor, and this council meeting is one of those reasons, with all the kind of nonsense that's going on and all the screaming and shouting. And so that's not a reason why you want to do it. The reason why you want to do it is because you want to solve some problems. And I think
Does that sound like a pitch to you?
Well, it's a reasonable pitch, and I think there would be a lot of people that would get behind a candidate, Denzel Minnan-Wong, for mayor. But I think it's an important point with respect to there are very many things that are wrong in this city. And whomever it is that is going to run in a by-election that is sort of putting this as a calculation, they have to look at the very real problems that we're facing right now. Crime, TTC, the crime on the TTC, the fact that the city is very dirty. You know, we're coming out of the pandemic not as strong as we could be. So a lot of big issues. But you talk about the crowded field. And we're going to have a very tight time frame when this election could happen. So it's going to be someone with some name recognition. It's going to be someone who already has a footprint, shall we say. A lot of other names, I'm former councillor Josh Cole is considering looking at it. There's others.
Okay, very quickly, I just want to push you a little bit more if I can, Denzel. is that a strong maybe?
That's, I'm not going to take long to make my decision, but it's a tough one. There is no job like being mayor.
But you're strongly considering it?
Nothing more rewarding, but there's the work factor, the time factor, stunning. Like, you know what? If you've got a young family, which I do, it's a big factor. So I'm weighing all those things.
And Jennifer can tell you all about that, right?
Sure.
Okay. Now that we have that out of the way, I want to throw out a few more names. We talked about Brad Bradford, Josh Matlow, Michael Ford, Anna Bilau, Kristen Wong Tam. So this is going to be, as Adrienne mentioned, Jennifer, a very crowded race if all of these people do, in fact, end up running.
Yeah, well, the list should be long right now. It hasn't even been announced that we're moving into a by-election, but I would expect that there's some jockeying that happens very quickly as people try to put together their teams and they see whether other people are actually taking their key people. The really key part here is that, particularly because it's going to be a relatively short election, you know, people don't get to write a book a year and launch it a year in advance, as has happened in the past. Name recognition is going to be critical, and the way that you get that in a short period of time is you need a real machine behind you. You know, this just isn't someone showing up and, you know, talking rainbows and butterflies and boom, they're the mayor. There's going to be a pretty sophisticated operation behind this winning mayoral candidate. We have a wide open seat. That's actually, I think that's pretty exciting in this city. It's an opportunity for someone to come out of the gate with a big vision, someone who has, as Denzel says, someone who has the energy, the passion, and someone who really knows how to solve problems in this city, because we have seen a really serious state of decline emerge over the past 8 years. It's, I think, shocking to many people, the way it's crept up on this city. In some ways, we handled the pandemic really well, but you know what? We didn't come out of it very well. The streets really are a mess. Our parks are a mess. We have operational issues within the bureaucracy. We need someone who knows how to fix those operational issues so that our garbage cans get emptied out in our parks. And then we've got the big motherlode issues of access to transit and public safety on transit, which is going to devastate this city if people are afraid to take transit, because it's the backbone of how we get around. And then, you know, there's housing. Housing, not a small thing, that people are being forced into a super long commute because they can't afford to live in the city. And I think it's no coincidence that we've seen this crazy challenge with really visible homelessness in a moment where we really do not have a good solution on the books for solving the housing problem.
Okay, very quickly, I'm going to try one last time. Raise your hand if you are not running for mayor.
Not running?
Not running.
All right.
I can officially declare on CP24 I'm not running.
Okay. All right.
I haven't made any announcements yet, so I'll put my hand up too.
He didn't raise his hand, just saying. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24's special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall. Stay with us. We have lots more to come after the break. That is when we check back in with our expert panel on what comes next for Toronto following John Tory's decision to step down. Welcome back to our special coverage, Toronto After Tory. We're talking about what happens after John Tory formally submits his resignation. Uncertainty at City Hall continues this evening as Tory remains in his role as mayor to see the budget passed. Tory's proposed budget has been met with some criticism, with some opposing the large increase in funding for police and cuts to the TTC. Let's check in with our Beatrice Faisman now. She's been at City Hall all day following the latest developments. Beatrice, what's the latest with that marathon meeting? Could the budget pass tonight?
It very well could. It seems they're in it for the long haul. Lena, they voted just before 7 o'clock to continue through 8 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, they said, let's just keep going and get through the agenda. It's funny that I look around and see some of the councillors starting to get feisty, or some of them even starting to get squirrely. I'm watching some of them, including Councillor Matlow, who's been doing laps around council chambers all day. And now Councillor Morley has also started to do that as well, telling me she's getting tired, wanting to stretch her legs. I'm watching Councillor Mike Cole gripping his stress ball. So that's where we are at the state of this marathon meeting. Certainly things, it looks like, perhaps starting to wind down at this point. Mayor John Tory standing up around 7 o'clock, addressing his council colleagues for the very first time, asking them to support this budget. This is a Mayor John Tory budget. He had his hand in crafting it along with the budget chief and city staff. And he says it's been the toughest budget that he's had to put together so far in his tenure. Here's what the mayor said.
carjackings.
What the budget represents overall and the motion today is a whole series of difficult but very carefully considered choices. That's what you have to make. You have to try and achieve that balance. You can't do everything that you want to do. You never can in a budget, whether it's a household budget or a company budget or a government budget.
With the basic services that local
One of the key items that passed earlier this evening is the property tax increase, a combined total of 7%, 5.5 property tax, 1.5 city building levy. And then we're also hearing from some of the councillors who didn't feel as though they were they were part of the budget consultations or the putting together of this document enough, including Councillor Josh Matlow, who said this on the council floor.
I had a friend of mine.
Each one of our colleagues who have stood up today have not been really welcomed into the budget process. This has been a strong mayor budget. In fact, many of them even asked for mere information during the budget process, and they were denied that opportunity. So that's why a lot of these things are coming to council. I mean, this is what happens when councillors are not involved or allowed to be involved meaningfully in a more inclusive budget process. We have to work together and find a way to just have the mayor, to have council listen.
To the David Miller administration.
And then, of course, on the outskirts of council chamber floors, here in the hallways and the elevators, the talk surrounding Mayor John Tory. Will he resign or won't he? Should he resign or shouldn't he? Councillors split on that as well as this marathon council meeting continues. Back to you.
Okay, we'll find out soon enough. Beatrice Faisman reporting live tonight. Thank you, Beatrice. And for more on what we're hearing from Torontonians, we're joined live tonight by News Talk 1010 host John Moore. John, thanks so much for joining us. I know this is past your bedtime, so we really appreciate this.
Up late, and I'll be on early tomorrow morning at 5:15 on CP24.
Appreciate this, John. You know, a by-election hasn't even been called yet, and it's already feeling like this is going to be a really crowded race, isn't it?
No, you're absolutely right. And I've been observing on my show that this is such a wide open race. I mean, most people thought they had a 3.5-year runway to get ready to run for mayor. So you were just looking at Josh Matlow there. I think everybody knows Josh Matlow wants to run for mayor. All of a sudden, he finds out he's got to do it in 90 days. There is a shopping list of candidates. Just before I came on with you, I started making a list of people. People are talking about Brad Bradford, Anna Bilal, who's a former city council, Josh Matlow on the list, Brad Bradford, who is apparently the darling of the provincial conservatives. Today, they started a whisper campaign for Mark Saunders, the former police chief. Does Olivia Chow want to come back?
Okay. We've lost John Moore's audio. Such a shame because he always had such great things to say. We'll try to connect with him as soon as we can. We're going to take a quick break now. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24 special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall. We'll have more after the break when we check back in with our expert political panel. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Toronto After John Tory. What happens the moment after John Tory submits his formal resignation? We're talking about that and so much more with Jennifer Keesmaat, Adrian Batra, and Denzel Menon Wong. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the process. What actually happens when John Tory submits his resignation?
So Denzel and Jennifer are far more experts on this, but my understanding is the clock starts ticking really right away. So they have to have a council meeting. They have to declare the seat vacant. And then after that, it's 45 days for council to declare it vacant and then have a by-election.
The by-election period is actually 45 days. So within 60 days, they have to call the election within 60 days. So they might do that, they might do that really, really quickly. And I'm sure there's a lot of jockeying happening right now at council conversations about whether they should wait, whether they should do it right away. It's a real advantage to people who have profile, as was mentioned earlier, if it happens right away. So there's probably quite a bit of negotiating going on in
They should
the
act right
antechamber.
away, though. They shouldn't drag it out. They should call it an emergency council meeting, and that can happen in earnest.
And do you think that is what's going to happen? They're going to call it right away, Denzel? We don't know. We don't really know anything at
it's
this
interesting.
point, right?
I mean, the question is who calls it? Who calls a special meeting? Would that be the deputy mayor that calls the meeting? I think it might be. So, but when you think about it, if you have 60 days, you have 60 plus 45. The election could be 3.5 months.
Where does that
It could be
leave?
as long as 3.5 months. And so, here's where there's some drama in this.
More?
Oh yeah. There's tons of drama that you and I haven't even thought of yet.
Goodness. Okay.
But this is what the campaigns are thinking. If you consider yourself a front runner, you want to get this over with as soon as possible because you're ahead. But if you're not a front runner, you're going to want as much time as you can to put a campaign team together to get your message out. If you don't have profile, you want to do all that stuff.
And raise a lot of money.
Yeah. So there are some candidates that have been thinking about this for a long time. So they've got all their commitments all put away here, and they want to tidy this up really quickly. So there may be factions on council who some are supporting one candidate, some supporting another candidate, and then you're going to have this discussion about when you're going to have the special meeting, how long is the election going to be, all that type of stuff.
Jennifer, as somebody who's run for mayor before, you know how long and exhausting this process can be, and then we're talking about a very short by-election here. How challenging is that then for perhaps a lesser-known candidate to get those signatures to raise that money?
Getting the signatures is pretty straightforward. Raising the money is going to be a big problem for everyone, even the front runners. If you have a really crowded field, you just have less money to go around, split between more candidates. So I know candidates were making phone calls on the weekend, trying to raise money this weekend already, seeing how, what their support looked like. And, it depends on who the candidates are. Like, do we have a very clear candidate on the right and a very clear candidate on the left, or do we have a mixed up pool on both sides that's actually dividing up the support? That means less spending. And let's face it, in a city of this scale, the amount of money you raise is everything. It's really difficult to get signs up, I know this, across the city when you just don't have people, you don't have support, you don't have people on the ground to do it.
That's right.
One of the big problems with my campaign, we had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. We just couldn't even manage the volunteers because we didn't have a big enough team in the home office to run a ground game. And that became a really big constraint on pulling the vote as well. So that's going to be the biggest issue. We want to see the field narrow pretty quickly once the election is called so that people can run robust campaigns and Torontonians can really hear policy ideas.
Yeah, we'll have to see how all of that unfolds. We're going to take a quick break now. You're watching Toronto After Tory, CP24 special coverage of what happens next at Toronto City Hall. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking all things Toronto City Council tonight. So much to unpack. We're going to check back in with News Talk 1010 host John Moore. John, thanks so much for being with us again. He joins us live over the phone now. Everybody in the city is talking about this story. John, what have you been hearing?
Oh, gosh. I mean, you have to bear in mind that, John Tory worked with us for several years as our afternoon show host. And so he's a personal friend. He's a former business associate. He's somebody we know well. So, for a lot of us at News Talk 1010, this is a very personal crisis, as a matter of fact. I saw the mayor today, and I just thought he looked tired and ashen and maybe 5 years older than he did last week. But then you get into the aspects of where do we move forward? And first of all, to the question that you might ask as to whether I think John Tory is going to resign, I do believe he's going to follow through.
Yeah.
It's just his brand. He has been the Boy Scout, no story Tory. I just think that this is going to be the end of his career. And I think he has to be in a personal state of incredible anguish as well. But then when you get into what happens with the election, and I know all of your panelists have been talking about this, what I've noted is how wide open a field it is. Almost nobody wanted to take on John Tory in the last election because he was unbeatable. So we had Gil Penalosa, who I guess was sort of putting down a marker and saying, maybe next time I'm going to run and maybe next time I could win. But this time, I made a list before you and I got together this evening. And, very quickly, Brad Bradford, Anna Bilal, Josh Matlow, we have John Burnside, who actually told me personally that he's not going to run now. People started whispering about Mark Saunders this morning. Does Olivia Chow want to try it again? Gil Penalosa does. Jennifer Keesmaat is in studio with you. She says she's not running, but she's been on CP24 a lot this week. Michael Couteau, Mitzi Hunter, Mike Layton, Jennifer McKelvey, who becomes the mayor or the interim mayor. This is a huge field of people, and any one of them could win.
Okay, we've got about 45 seconds left to go here. 30 seconds now, I'm told, John. How crucial is it that Toronto get that stable leadership that it needs?
Oh, it's beyond critical. I mean, John Tory was elected because he said, listen, I'm going to give you 4 years. I'm going to close out my agenda. I'm going to be able to get the money from the feds and from Queen's Park. I'm going to be able to make this work. Now we have this interim period of chaos where we have to find the new mayor. Then they have to find their feet. This is going to be a difficult, this was supposed to be an easy 4 years, and it's going to be difficult.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Okay.
And thank you for joining us tonight for Toronto After Tory, our special coverage of what comes next for the city as Mayor John Tory announces his resignation. Thanks so much for being with us.